toward the One, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the messenger, the spirit of guidance. Welcome, everyone. This is the fifth and final class in this series on the evolution of the Gabrielite work. And our theme tonight is what we call the Sophianic function, which means becoming capable of participating in the human-divine co-creative process. And Ravani Ra is going to start us off with a poem.
Blessed from inside out. You have been blessed from the inside out, rays streaming from inner spaces and outer landscapes. Feel now in what gentle awe you are held. Allow each cell to open and be bathed in the light that has always claimed you, bringing greetings from solar realms, plant and animal kingdoms, and winds from every direction. Place your feet solidly on the earth. Open receptors you've never known. Each cell now radiating your own song. A new blessing rises up from you as you join in the recurrent creation. Release now the returning stroke, which folds your soul print, your contribution, into the pattern of the universe.
So in this class, we hope to put a lot of things together that we've shared with you previously, because our hope with this series is more than just perhaps you're feeling, well, this was interesting, I learned some things, I got a few insights, but we hope it will offer you some tools to really make a shift in your way of looking at yourself, the world, your spiritual practices, your spiritual journey. And as we talked about early on, we said in the Gabrielite work, there are a lot of components which we call the Gabrielite mysteries, and we covered several of those during the course of these classes. And now tonight, we're going to see how they all really build and intertwine with each other. So, this class is about becoming capable of participating in the human-divine co-creative process. Pir Vilayat will talk about our becoming able to participate in the divine programming, the software of the universe. So what are some things that are necessary to be able to do this? Well, one is presence. And we've talked about presence is much more than just simple awareness of yourself and something that you are experiencing. It's not a static, passive experience. It's an experience in which there's an ongoing emergence, both in you and whatever it is that you are experiencing. We've talked about the barzakh, the interface, the meeting place. We talked about the heart being the place where this takes place, the in-between of our manifest and transcendent self, between our human and divine aspects of our being. And we've talked about Bekenstein's bound, which showed that there is a limit to how much information can go in either direction between any two things through an interface. So in this case, we could say between the human and divine aspects of our being. But the capacity for what can transpire in either direction is greatly increased when we awaken to the fact that we do not just exist as separated dualistic beings in physical manifestation, existing at a particular time and space, but rather, as Hazrat Inayat Khan has reminded us, that human beings have our existence in every realm, every subtle realm, and what we might call every vibrational level of existence, the jinn realm, the angelic realm, and so on. So when we awaken to the reality that we are multidimensional beings, when we develop the capacity of what I call multimodal consciousness, being able to be simultaneously aware of different levels on which we exist and experiencing a never-ending circulation of light between those levels, with the light transforming each side all the time, then what can take place through that interface is so much more than what could possibly take place if we approach this meeting as with a sense of being a separated being. So these are all, you could say in one sense they're skills, but in another sense they're actually just ways of being and ways of becoming what is meant to be a natural way of us being in life as human beings. Because we exist in an unnatural state of being, which seems natural just because it's our habit and it's our status quo. We exist in what I've described as a simulation, a constricted version of the actual reality of who we are and the reality that we exist in. So when we awaken to that broader reality, then we can truly experience the fulfillment of the purpose of what our spiritual journey is about.
So something that we really need to have in order to work on this co-creative process is imagination. And we're talking about the true imagination. This one, imaginatio vera, is one way of saying that in alchemical tradition. So what it really means is reinventing the way that we perceive the world, the way that we perceive ourselves. And an important aspect to why we call it the Sophianic function is that we're going back to that very beginning that we've spoken about before too, in the Quran, really, that we find this statement that I was a hidden treasure, said God, yearning to be known, yearning to be loved. But we find at that time there was also, even though you would say that he was in this hidden condition, that there also is the Sophia, wisdom was there at the same time. So the wisdom is called Sophia and brings to this situation one of the first combinations, partnerships, I guess they'd call it, and that we as Sufis have heard many times that creation is recurrent, that it isn't just this moment way before anything else happened, that it is happening all the time. And if we know that, then we can enter into the new creation. We can enter into a process where we, as the new Sophias, can partner with the divine, and we call it the human divine, but it's also combining with other levels of manifestation. And Azarbash mentioned the Barzakh, and I think of that as a full place. Sometimes we called it field, certainly a multidimensional existence and opportunities that would be there as multidimensional beings. So that's a great imagination changer, to think of us as having so many different connections that are difficult to think of, but it is possible to work on our consciousness and bring it to a state where we are unfolded and holding so much more than we thought we could.
And we had one of our classes on consciousness, and we've talked about the journey of awakening requires us to make a quantum shift in our frame of reference, our way of relating to everything, to ourselves, to the world, to what we think of as the transcendent, what we think of as the divine. But our habitual tendency is just to think that we can go about this just adding a little bit more here and a little bit more there, just a nice linear progression, acquiring more information, acquiring more practices, acquiring more experiences, and then somehow we're going to get transported to a totally different state of being, which I think in every spiritual tradition, that's what it seems to be. Enlightenment is not the same thing as our usual walking around state. Liberation, moksha, mukti, these are very different states of being, and they're not continuous with our usual state of being. So we've talked about the importance of being able to go through many, many cycles of what the Sufis call fana and baka, a breaking down or releasing of a former vantage point, being able to be in an in-between, as yet unformed state where we don't know and can't know what's going to emerge from the other side, and then coming to that place of reorganization, which is called baka, which sometimes is translated as rebirth or resurrection. But this is not a single experience. This is a many, many, many time experience of getting to a certain level, which the Sufis call a maqam, M-A-Q-A-M, which means state or station. And then we have some temporary experiences, hal, H-A-L, which are like sneak previews of a future state of being that seems so different from where we are. You know, they're described as peak experiences. Our consciousness was somehow raised to a very mystical state. But when we go through that process of fana and baka and get to the next station, what seemed to be so different from our usual state of being now is our natural level of function, and we continue from there. So it's important to realize that this is a journey that never ends, and it would not be desirable if it ever did. And what drives this journey? The term for it in the Sufis is ishq, I-S-H-Q, which means sometimes translated as nostalgia, but in that sense, it's usually a nostalgia for something that was previously experienced. Well, that's one aspect of it. There's a longing to come back to the source from which we arose at that moment of creation of our soul, to come close to return to the divine or the beloved. And in many traditions, that's the end point. That's the desire to get to that. But the Sufis say that there's a purpose-oriented condition of what creation is about. It's not about going back and returning. It's about furthering the possibilities of the expression of divinity and manifestation that we are essential parts of. And everything in manifestation is an essential part of the further emergence of divinity in manifestation. So we can become capable of participating in this ongoing process. Hazrat Inayat Khan, as many of you know, said that every desire begins with a divine impulse. And that divine impulse gets distorted all the way down to our human consciousness, sometimes 180 degrees off kilter. So that doesn't mean every desire we think we have is necessarily a good thing or a divine desire, but at its origin, it started with that. And so our aim is more than just clearing away the distortions and just aligning ourselves with that original divine impulse, but the aim is to further what can come from that impulse that can only come from the wisdom gained in our human experience that returns something back to the divine in what's called the returning light. So we could say that desire is the fuel that drives creation. Desire is what got the engine of creation started in the first place when the divine said kun, be, become. there was a longing in the divine to know and be known, to love and be loved. And as Ravani Ra talked about, we think that Sophia, the being of wisdom, actually elicited that desire from what we think of as the divine being. So we project onto the divine. Well, the divine just kind of out of the blue went, well, okay, I want to know myself. And you can anthropomorphize and think, well, that's probably accurate from if you could just separate out somehow from the divine vantage point. But from the vantage point of this partnership of Sophia and the manifesting being of the divine, Sophia actually drew forth this desire. So that started the whole thing, but that continues to further. It's the driving force of the new creation emerging into more than what was there before at the last instant. So that happens on a cosmic level, but it also happens on the level of each of our individual beings. We can say there's the driving force, the eliciting light of Sophia that's pulling forth a desire in us to become more. And I read to you last time this beautiful quote from Ibn Arabi, which I will paraphrase, but he said the lover in this relationship with the beloved brings into existence that which does not exist in the beloved. So somehow, in this relationship of the human and divine, love, lover, and beloved, something is brought into beingness, into creation, that was not just latent somewhere. It was not existent. It's hard for our minds to think about this, but we're bringing something into manifestation that couldn't have been there except for us. And we've talked before about himma, the creative faculty of the heart. So we could say, okay, ishq is the fuel that drives creation, but himma is the means for this to take place.
So I find it so comforting in a way and so elevating to us to think of the importance of our desire, the importance of our yearning. You know, sometimes we feel like, oh my gosh, you know, when am I going to get over this and have just be happy and not have this, oh no, an overwhelming yearning. Here we come again. Oh, this pull. Oh, I just can't stand this. What? And to find a purpose for it is so comforting, and more than that, it is confirming to us, all of us, that there is a purpose for this deep desire. It really is often reflected in things in the world, but it is that ish that formed the creation. And now it is an ishq that forms the next moment of creation, this recurrent creation, that we have a chance to be part of the creation, recreation of the entire world. It's like, well, how in the world can we even, we have to really do a lot of reimagining to think of ourselves as someone that could be participating in this and bringing our own ishq, our own himma, creative power to this experience. One thing that helps me is to do some reimagining of who we are. And one thing about us is that we are the inheritors of the divine. We are the daughters of God. We are the sons of God. And one way of thinking about it, when it's a little bit more divided, that we're still thinking in terms of one side and the other. But when we put that together, we need to feel that we are those cherished ones. And I'm talking about all of the possibility of all of humanity, not only that, all of conscious beings that are so cherished and deeply loved, that can make mistakes and then be forgiven for those mistakes, be understanding why it is that we make these mistakes. We're living on the front lines things are so difficult in the way that our imaginations work and the way that we see the world. And so, of course, we're going to flub it quite a few times. But we learn through this process and eventually are finding ways to break through those habits and those ways of seeing things and find this glory in the back of it and find the relationship with the divine. So God created the manifestation to be able to be loved and known, and it's by us that he is loved and known. We are playing a major role in this unfolding of everything.
This journey of awakening involves an evolution of our consciousness. And if we can think about the history of spirituality throughout time, that's got its own evolutionary course. But sometimes in the course of evolution, and it could be of all kinds of things, it could be of science, it could be religion, it could be spirituality, things can get stuck at a certain point when it's just taken for granted that a previous assumption about the nature of reality, in this case, the nature of spirituality, must be true because that's what it's been thought of for even thousands of years. So both Hazrat Inayat Khan and Pir Vilayat talked about the importance for spirituality to be able to evolve, to honor the wisdom of the past, but to be open to modifying and changing. And just the example you may be familiar with, someone asked the Dalai Lama, what would happen if science proved that something the Buddha said was not valid? And he said, we'd have to revise our teachings. He didn't say, well, that can't be. The Buddha is just the absolute authority. So some of these old assumptions, and we don't think of them usually as assumptions because just like normally we don't think that the world is really multidimensional and we're really multidimensional and we really span across time and even beyond time, because everybody is living in this simulation in which it's the status quo that of course is the way that things are. So some of these old assumptions are Pir Vilayat would talk about a causality-driven notion of spirituality. And this has to do with the notion of karma, the notion that we have to burn through our karma, the fruits of our actions, both good and bad, before we can get to where we're really wanting to go. And Pir Vilayat would talk about the purpose-oriented nature of reality. And some wise Sufi from hundreds of years ago, and I've quoted this many times, said, oh man, if you but knew that you are free, it's your thought of captivity that keeps you in chains. So as long as it's taken as a dogma that this is the way that things are, well, then of course, people are going to want to pursue the tried and true paths to get to what the destination is. But if we think, well, maybe this is not really what the story is about. As Ibn Arabi says, each of us has access to a unique part of the divine wisdom that no other soul ever has or could have access to. And if the purpose of existence was for the divine to come to know the divine's own self, then think of how remarkable and ennobling it is to feel that there's something that can be revealed through the wisdom gained in our life that the divine couldn't have known except through us. And it wasn't sitting somewhere in a file somewhere and God just couldn't find it. It wasn't there. It was emergent through our relationship between ourselves and divinity, both in the transcendent direction, but also in the cosmic direction with our relationship with things in manifestation. So this notion of Dharma, which is a keeper throughout hundreds of years, that there's a unique purpose to each of us. And we've talked about how important it is to recognize the uniqueness of each of our beings. And each of us has a unique way to bring forth that wisdom that can be revealed through us, and a unique way that we can participate in the process, the human divine co-creative process of bringing something into existence that wasn't there before. And we talked about there's so many ways that this takes place. It's not necessarily for everybody sitting and meditating for long periods of time, or even necessarily doing spiritual practices. It's a person's way of being in the world, a way of being in what we've described as relational unity, of getting out of the stuck place of a dualistic sense of self and a dualistic sense of the world.
I like to refer people to our book, The Gabrielite Work, Broadband Spirituality for the 21st Century, because as comprehensive as hopefully these classes have been for you, there's so much more. One section I'd want to refer you to are the different practices and objectives that we recommend for people to be able to work with the kinds of things we're talking about here. So what do we need to have, and what do we need to do? And I have a few of them written down here, but please look more into it. One is to develop the light of our being. Another is to perceive and interact with the deeper levels of reality in which we live. Another one is to develop skills in relationship and co-creation. So we're working with other people in very fruitful ways, and to more fully experience our relationship with God, to discover our latent possibilities, which of course our wazifas help us to get in touch with those, and then also working with them in many ways, and then also exercising our creativity. And that means many different ways of creativity. As Azarbash was just saying, how unique we are and how we're each given many different possible events for that creativity.
So I've mentioned before, if I had like 1 minute to spend with someone and I wanted to give them some spiritual guidance, I would have 2 sentences for them. And the first would be, life is your teacher. And the second would be, life is your practice. So we've talked about different ways to really actualize some of the things we're talking about. We've talked about the notion that every circumstance is potentially a portal or an opening to the sacred, and that's brought about by our way of relating to that circumstance, our outlook on the circumstance, what quality that we allow to arise in the circumstance that opens up new possibilities that were not there before. So, you know, sometimes it's our tendency to think about spirituality just in terms of lots of practices that we do and retreats that we go on, which are wonderful and valuable. And then we think about things like, well, how we go about being in the world, where we want to be good people, we want to be moral people, we want to be kind, we want to be compassionate. All wonderful, but there's much more to the pathway to awakening more and more in our life. And one way to do this, or to help bring this about, is to, we talked about tau wheel last week, this harmonic perception with what we're experiencing. And well, Ravani Ra and I were just watching this wonderful show on Curiosity Stream, and it was about plants, how plants communicate. And it was like some of the latest research, and it was just mind-boggling. For instance, one plant, if the caterpillars start eating the leaves, not only does that trigger a reaction where that plant starts to secrete a toxin, but it puts into the air some molecules that go to plants in the area that basically tell those other plants to start making that toxin so they'll be safe from the caterpillars. And so they did studies, and they find like certain trees in a forest, whatever the pest was on that tree would be really eating a lot of it, but the nearby trees were not touched, and they were trying to figure, well, why is this? Surely these pests could figure that out, and it's because these other trees were making toxins, and they would be communicating all sorts of other things. I mean, in ways that we can't imagine. In fact, I think they said plants have 20 different sensory ways of communicating. So that's just some information that kind of opens up our way of thinking about the world. Well, Tawil, let's say in relation to plants, when we're just sitting with a tree or a flower or going for a walk, if we go back to this notion that everything is Gabriel seeking to reveal its unique divinity, that's not just true for people, that's true for everything. It's true for plants, it's true for birds, it's true for insects. So if we intentionally go for a walk with the notion, well, we're just going to be open to listening with our inner ear and seeing with our inner eye, what we're connecting to might be communicating to us. And I guarantee you, if you try this and you're just really open to it, you'll experience almost an instantaneous shift in what you're perceiving. And you'll probably have a feeling, well, this tree really is communicating something. This tree is really grateful that the tree is being noticed and receiving a feeling of gratitude for the shade that it offers, for the oxygen that it puts into the air, for the beauty that it brings. And there's the other side of Tawil, as we talked about last week. We can't be in this state of harmonic relationship and harmonic perception with something, perceiving the deeper nature of, let's say, a rose, unless we've already entered into a deeper state of beingness of our own being. We've opened up to other levels on which we exist, because otherwise we couldn't be having this experience. So simultaneously to us experiencing the way the Gabriel of what we're experiencing is being revealed to us, what we're experiencing is partaking of the Gabriel that's revealed from us. So think about that, instead of just thinking, well, okay, I'm noticing this tree and somehow the tree might be grateful because I'm perceiving it. Imagine the delight in the tree being able to somehow experience on an inner level a different aspect of divinity present in our being, now in relationship with that tree. And now there's the effect of the light upon light that generates wisdom, that generates new possibilities, that furthers the experience of the divine in relationship to existence, that couldn't come just from me separately, and it couldn't come just from the tree. So now it's like you also get, Gabriel is not just communicating this way, and Gabriel is not just communicating this way. Okay, God gives Gabriel the message, Gabriel it brings to us. Okay, we're broadcasting our unique divinity, we're receiving the unique divinity, but what's returned to the divine being through Gabriel is a revelation and discovery of something previously unknown of the divine being's own self. So now the divine being has got an answer to the call the divine put out. Because as I said, I think last week, kun is an imperative. You just look at that, it's like, okay, I command be. But you couldn't have that unless there was a reason for there wanting to be something to be. So it's this yearning, the ishq of the divine for what's going to come back to the divine as the fulfillment of this desire. And that's what happens in the relationship, in the connection with manifest beings that we can participate in.
Well, I have another side to our education, and that is kind of partners with what Azrabash said earlier about everything is a portal, that we look at the times when we are stuck in duality and what kind of things stick us in that duality. Often it is an argument with someone, or feeling that we're not as good as that person, a comparison kind of thing, or all kinds of different human dynamics that we have, that we might just say, well, that's kind of how things are. But if we treat it as a portal and as a possible way to transform, and so that we're not going, I call it the push me, pull you kind of routine, where this tension and dynamic keeps us at this level where all these wonderful things that Azar was talking about don't enter in very much. Well, so we would maybe take a look at something, maybe go to a counselor, maybe talk with a friend, maybe just take a close look at that and do what I imagine is to have compassionate witness. So it's like I feel that I have maybe an angel or my mother or someone that is watching what I'm doing and is feeling such warmth for me, so that I feel capable of looking at this difficult situation and knowing if I work with this, it's going to open something up that gives an amazing transformation to my situation, and then to more than just my vision, to more and helping the world. So we tackle it instead of just trying to avoid it or just putting up with this feeling of it could be better, and how come I'm always having this negative feeling about these things. So it kind of makes you more of a champion of saying, okay, I'm going to take a look at this. And then there's something that's amazing, and we're going to go through this portal, and it'll be a whole different experience. So that's a real adventurous way of looking at working with our problems.
So this is an important point, because we are human, and I don't think any being, no matter how far along in their journey to awakening, could honestly say that they never get pulled back into reactive states, into states of feeling separated. So it's important to recognize when that happens and not get down on ourselves because it happens, but to recognize when we're in a space like that and ask ourselves, well, what's going on? What triggered me into going back into the simulation that I thought was as good as it got? And then we can refer back to other times in our life, and we've all had them when things were just amazing. Like you could say they were the peak experiences. It could be a time in some wonderful place in nature, or listening to amazing music, or just whatever it might have been, but you were in a state that you wished you could have just stayed in all of the time. So those are kind of markers. Okay, those are indications that you were in this natural state of your being. And the space where you've been pulled out of that, you could say, would be the antithesis of Ta wheel. Instead of opening up to the deeper reality, you've come back into the constricted reality. But then as soon as you realize that, and you remind yourself, this is not who I am, this is not my true nature. I've gotten caught up in old patterns of thinking, old patterns of emotional reaction, and I can free myself from these. So, and then Pir Vilayat offered many wonderful techniques, which I'll just briefly describe.
Sure.
One, he would talk about when you're dealing with a difficult person, and having a difficult boss is a common one, but it could be having a difficult teacher if you're in school, or
Co-workers.
yeah, just anybody that you wish would go away in your life, and you just tend to really shut off when you're around them and react to them. But then you might ask yourself, well, I wonder why this person is this way. And Pir Vilayat would talk about, well, you can try to get into the consciousness of that person. What does the world seem like to them when everybody's projecting all this negativity? And then you could just imagine, use your creative imagination. Well, perhaps they have an illness, perhaps they had a significant loss, a trauma, perhaps they were abused growing up. But if you believe that inherently everyone is a manifestation of the divine being, well, maybe it's covered up pretty well in this other person, and they don't realize that that's the true nature of themselves. But if you can see past what they're presenting, and you can relate to them with perhaps a quality of compassion and feeling that, and you're not reacting when you're dealing with them, something's going to change, maybe not instantly, but over time in the way that person is likely to respond to you. Probably with everybody else, they're being the same as they were. And they may find themselves wanting to be around you more because it feels really good for them to be with someone who sees more to them than perhaps they see in themselves. Now you've opened up something in that circumstance. You've created what the Sufis say, an akasha, an accommodation. So I'm going to do a little segue here back to traditional notions and maybe a different way of thinking about things. And I think I mentioned this last week in mystical Judaism. They talk about that originally the divine light came into existence through the different beings, but somehow it got broken into just pieces like shards of pottery. And the purpose is for the human beings to put these shards back together and restore the light back to the divine. So we've talked about in healing, one aspect of healing is restoration to a previous state of wholeness. The wazifa for that is mu'id, M-U''I'-D. But the Sufis say, well, that's great, but then there's muhi, well, I'm not sure, there's an apostrophe in there somewhere, M-U-H-Y-I, which means transformation. It's becoming something more. So what I've started thinking about lately, instead of thinking, well, the idea being taking these broken shards and putting them back together and restoring the light, thinking of these bits of light here and there are like seeds of divinity that were implanted in us. And we could say those seeds are our divine inheritance. Those are planted in the garden of our soul. And our purpose is to blossom these into previously unknown fruits and flowers and more seeds of transformation. It's not to bring them back to where they were, but it's to spread more and more of this emergent manifestation of divinity in the world. So how different does it feel to think about that as opposed to the other one? Mm-hmm. So I had a whole series of classes. The title of the series was Awakening as a Divine Service. So we tend to think, again, it's a dualistic notion of spirituality, that awakening is for us. It's for me to get enlightened, illuminated, liberated, saved, whatever word you want to put in there. But I think at a certain point, we realize it can't be about us as a separate being, because we think that everything is an expression of divinity. Then we can think of everything in the universe as awakening to itself to fuller and fuller levels, which takes place through greater and greater capacities of light to manifest in existence. And that can only take place through the individual beings, not just functioning separately, but to coming into a harmonic relationship with each other, groups of them, aligning intentions and consciousness to bring something forth that was even more than what could have been conceived of before, that was not sitting someplace. So then there's no end to the fulfillment of divinity in existence. And if that doesn't give you a good reason to get out of bed in the morning, I'm not sure what does.
What about a meditation?
Okay, so yeah, how about a meditation? So close your eyes. And remind yourself that the very creation of your soul began with a longing in the divine being for the discovery of what could become, that could only become through you. So the creation of your being was the launching forth of a unique prayer of the divine. Each soul is the expression of a unique prayer of the divine being. And your very being is that. You are, God awaits the fulfillment of the response to God's prayer for God's own being that can only take place through you. So just try that one on for size. Now, just as you can feel this ishq of the divine for the fulfillment that can only take place through you, allow yourself to feel the ishq or the longing of all the rest of manifest divinity in every level of creation, longing for that same discovery of the unique divinity that can only come through from you. Everything is awaiting Gabriel's message that comes from your being. As if that's not wonderful enough, allow yourself to feel that ishq, that longing for your own discovery of the unique divinity that emerges in every relationship that you ever have had, are currently having, or could have in the future, or even beyond this life in subtle realms. That there's no end to the revelation of divinity that comes to you by virtue of your relationship with all that you experience. The mystics say our heart is vaster than the whole universe. Can you allow yourself to open to the awareness of the vastness of your heart? That is the living interface of your uniqueness with the unique way divinity is expressed through all, through everything. And new revelation is born at every instant. Revelation is something emergent. It's not the discovery of something that has been before. It's the discovery of something that never existed till then. So we've talked about the allegory of the soul, that each of us is composing a never-ending allegory of our own soul, which we could say is the scripture of our very being. And the allegory of each of our souls is part of the cosmic allegory of the divine soul, the divine being. Hazrat Inayat Khan not only said every desire begins with a divine impulse, but he also said there is no true desire that will not ultimately be fulfilled in this life or beyond. There's no ishq that you can have that won't be fulfilled. But similarly, there's no divine ishq that won't be fulfilled. I'll share with you a quote from Hazrat Inayat Khan. Just as everything in the objective world tends to rise upward, so the tendency of the soul can be seen in human aspiration, which always soars upward, whatever the sphere of one's consciousness. The aspirations of the one who is only conscious of material life reach as far as they can in material gains, yet their aspirations become higher and higher, and they remain discontented with all they achieve, owing to the immensity of life in every phase. This craving for the attainment of what is unattainable is the longing of the soul to reach life's utmost heights. It is the nature of the soul to try to discover what is behind the veil. It is the soul's constant longing to climb heights which are beyond its power. It's the desire of the soul to see something that it has never seen. It is the constant longing of the soul to know something it has never known. But the most wonderful thing about it is that the soul already knows there is something behind this veil of perplexity, that there is something to be sought for in the highest spheres of life. It knows that there is some beauty to be seen, that there is someone to be known who is knowable. This desire, this longing, is not acquired. This desire is the dim knowledge which the soul has within itself. And he goes on to say, the seeking for God is a natural outcome of the maturity of the soul. There is a time in life when a passion is awakened in the soul, which gives the soul a longing for the unattainable. If the soul does not take that direction, then it certainly misses something in life for which it has an innate longing and in which lies its ultimate satisfaction. And I'd like to share with you a poem that I wrote. The patches on the dervish's robes are maps of roads to other beings seen and unseen. Do you smell the perfumes of rare flowers? See the reflections of lights from unseen stars? Feel the weaves, the outward signs of patterns of celestial looms? Hear the music conducted by each breath, each thought, each sigh, each step. Turn within, whirl without, descend through veils, emanate through gift wrappings for jewels just born. Epiphany is the seed. Resurrection is the fruit. Become the tree of life which bends low, feeding the desires of souls, serving as the backbone of the one, to dance through emerging realms of glory.
Yeah.